Story 1. Early in my career, I had a boss who regularly threatened the sales staff. When he berated and humiliated them in his office, he sometimes opened his side desk drawer to reveal a pistol. I was an assistant to the sales team, so I was only a witness. I knew I had to leave that place the morning I came in to find one of my coworkers sobbing at his desk. He was a large, middle-aged man. He had just experienced one of the gun incidents, but knew he couldn't afford to leave the company. He needed his health insurance benefits because his wife of 30 years, a wonderful woman he loved deeply, was dying of cancer, and our boss was aware of this. Story 2. George Holmes of Lebanon, Missouri. After my ex-partner and I split several years ago, she began dating this man for a while. There were things that seemed off about him, and it became clear after talking to some mutual acquaintances that he was a pathological liar and had nearly been indicted for child abuse while at Camp Pendleton years prior. My ex-partner and I shared custody 50/50ths of our daughter, who was 4 years old at the time. I was very concerned about her being around George and expressed my worries to my ex-partner, but George had her completely convinced otherwise. I eventually had a face-to-face argument with George and told him to stop staying overnight while my daughter was with my ex-partner. He became furious, screaming and acting erratically, but he did not become physically violent. Eventually, my ex-partner began to see through the cracks in his lies, and I suspect she knew that there would be real trouble between George and me. She finally ended the relationship with him. About a year later, he was arrested for torturing a 3-year-old boy. The boy was found motionless with his eyes swollen shut, fractured arms and legs, and had apparently been locked in a closet where rodents had been biting him. The 3-year-old boy was in the intensive care unit for a few weeks but survived. George is a vile individual. I have never met anyone who made me feel as uncomfortable as he did. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Story 3. My former boss smiled while firing single mothers and then posted motivational quotes about success. He believed empathy was a liability. Story 4. I once dealt with a man in a professional setting who seemed to have killed his wife and children to prevent them from testifying against him in a misdemeanor domestic violence case. Story 5. A contractor killed his wife and set their house on fire to hide the crime. They had 2 young children at the time who were unharmed. The difficult part was that I knew his wife's father and had worked with him for years. He visited the day before the murder to seek advice on how to handle their problems. The father felt regret every day for advising his son-in-law to go back and resolve the issues. Story 6. He was skilled at hiding how terrible he was for years. He has numerous fake social media accounts that he uses to deceive people for fun. Occasionally, he completely clones other people's profiles and sends inappropriate messages between this fake account and one of his other accounts, then deletes the clone and forwards the screenshots to that person's significant other. The number of relationships he has ruined is astonishing, and he does it out of revenge for minor grievances. He is also exceptionally adept at photo editing, making it hard to detect any alterations. One time, he became jealous of a classmate who received a promotion, so he altered one of her old profile pictures, replacing a cigarette with a crack pipe. He sent this edited image to her employer, resulting in her being drug tested and unfortunately failing for marijuana, which achieved his intended outcome. He often complained about how manipulative his mother was, but later, his mother and sister provided evidence that he was the one engaging in the manipulative behavior he accused them of. After learning this, I decided to reach out to his ex to hear her side of the story. She shared screenshots of a conversation in which he attempted to persuade her to return to him after having physically abused her. Story 7. The man who was fired from his job in my city ran the local homeless shelter and was caught coercing some of the girls into sexual exchanges for housing. His eyes were lifeless. Story 8. My best friend in high school was a troublemaker who fought everyone. Teachers, security guards, and groups of 4 were all targets of his random violence. I always watched from the sidelines, trying to convince him that he didn't have to fight. He set a mutual friend's car on fire, which resulted in her hospitalization. I completely distanced myself from the friend group once everyone returned to normal after he was released from jail. Strangely, everyone accepted his behavior. I graduated in 1993 and left the friend group entirely by 1999. In 2016, he waited and murdered his then-girlfriend by strangling and beating her. Story 9. The first time I met my wife's cousin, he was late to his grandmother's funeral. Once the funeral was over, he went to the bathroom instead of attending to his pallbearer duties. He then proceeded to tell me, in front of my wife, who was then my girlfriend, and his 2 teenage daughters, to just buy her a ring, but don't marry her. All women are money hungry. When my wife died unexpectedly, he told my father-in-law that she was a drug addict and that this was his karma for a legal dispute they were having. He also sent a sod company to my father-in-law's land to steal his grass to pay his attorney so he could continue to sue my father-in-law. He is a terrible person. Story 10. My grandparents on my mother's side never had a kind word to say to anyone. They blamed it on the Great Depression. I blame it on the Southern comfort. Story 11. A friend's sister faced a difficult situation when her husband contracted COVID-19 and became gravely ill. He briefly died several times and was placed in an induced coma for some time. During this period, she began spreading falsehoods about her stepson's mental capacity in an attempt to have him committed and gain control over his inheritance. She exhibits manipulative and malignant narcissistic behavior. Story 12. In an inpatient psychiatric hospital where I was the executive manager, there was a young woman of 18 who had been institutionalized since the age of 13 for creating the conditions that directly led to the death of her stepparents and adopted sister. She seemed like a troubled teenager that any of us would recognize in society. However, she started a fire in the ward, attempted to escape, and engaged in sex work with others in the facility. Because she had threatened me personally, the court informed me of her death 11 years after I left that job. I felt sad. Story 13. My uncle. After he was arrested for the murder of my brother, he stated his intent was to kill everyone who left my parents' home that night. One of those individuals was an innocent 10-month-old baby. After being held for a couple of weeks, when asked how he was doing by the judge, his reply was, "Great. First time in forever I haven't had to stress about child support." As far as I know, he never felt remorse for what he did. Story 14. A couple of my coworkers tried to get me fired when my dad was in the hospital with a potentially fatal illness. They both knew about the situation, as I had been in contact with them during the crisis. Prior to that, I had been on good terms with them. In my opinion, they were attempting to take advantage of the situation to improve their standing at work. Not only did I have to deal with being backstabbed while my dad was sick, but I also had to endure a lengthy investigation by human resources. During this time, one of the coworkers posted potentially slanderous and borderline threatening comments directed at me on social media. Eventually, I was exonerated and one of the two quit, but the other remains a coworker. Story 15. The man who murdered my sister and fled to Mexico for 22 years after his crime was arrested and brought back for trial. People started telling us stories about him and his own daughter. He apparently practiced Santeria. He shot my sister in the head and left her body in a stairwell to be found days later. Story 16. I had a few former close friends who turned to crime. I grew up with these people in a small town. Here are the top 3. Former friend 1 was at a house party and raped and murdered a woman's daughter before heading home for the night. Former friend 2 stabbed and dismembered a man over a drug debt, leaving him in pieces in the bathtub. Former friend 3 set fire to a homeless man and killed him for no apparent reason, during a time when assaults on homeless individuals were prevalent. The town feels cursed, and I will never move back there, no matter how much I miss my friends and family. Story 17. My father once put my mother's dog in the dumpster after it died and brought my mother back a bag of sand, telling her it was the dog's ashes. He has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from family members, regularly charges low-income individuals more than wealthy clients for his medical services, and even accused my sister of inappropriate behavior when she was 10 years old, as revenge for my mother expressing her desire for a divorce. This is just a glimpse of his actions. It would not surprise me if there are even more troubling things he has done. Nobody in our family has spoken to him in over a decade. Story 18. A man from my neighborhood, who was quite religious, had a mother who was the musical director at the church my family attended. He moved out of state as an adult and became the musical director at a church. He admitted to inappropriate behavior with a young girl to whom he was giving music lessons. The district attorney suspected other incidents but could not obtain proof. He served his prison sentence and is now out running a group for men in my area. A friend who attends the same church as he does has been advised to keep his daughters away from him. Story 19. A guy who was my best friend in my late teens to early 20s was incredibly manipulative. I don't know how to describe him, but he was an extremely charismatic liar. You would have to see it to believe it. I can understand how some people fall for cult leaders. He definitely could have pulled that off. Behind the scenes, he was physically and sexually abusive. He was bisexual, so the abuse was directed at both women and men. He was a sadist. He beat his dog to death and lied, saying it got hit by a car. I found this out much later. I have no idea how he got away with it for so long. Once I discovered all the horrible things he was hiding, I stopped hanging out with him. I believe an ex reported him to the police. I never followed up to see how it went. I cut all contact and blocked him when he tried to pull me into his destructive world. Story 20. I worked with a person who was incompetent, racist, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, and an alcoholic, radiating misery. He bragged about serving his ex-wife divorce papers on their 25th anniversary. He disliked me for no reason, and I didn't feel safe working around him. My bosses insisted he was harmless. When he was eventually fired for stealing a client's payment, which I discovered, he tried to leave in a dramatic fashion. He returned to the office an hour later and attacked my boss, attempted to harm me, and others until he was subdued. He is still in prison and no one believed me. I miss you every day, no. Story 21. My ex is a very good-looking guy with his own business. He comes across as a kind and emotionally intelligent person, but it's an act. He is the biggest monster I have ever met. He never hit me, but the emotional damage he caused is the worst. I found a second therapist because he had me thinking I was the one with the problem. I have been hospitalized 3 times because of the things he put me through. He is not in my life anymore, thankfully, but the scars will always be there. Story 22. My uncle was always a bit odd but very nice, softly spoken, and kind. He had a successful marriage with a hardworking wife and 2 children. After years of hard work, they bought a countryside cottage in an area most people would dream of living. One day, the police came knocking and arrested him. It turned out he was part of a pedophile gang that operated on the dark web and had exploited multiple children under the age of 1. His family's lives were turned upside down. His children were bullied horrifically while they were in high school. They had to sell their house and move. Their lives were ruined. All of the other men in the ring took their own lives. But he didn't because he claimed it was my aunt's fault for getting cancer. I don't even know how evil someone has to be to wear a mask that well for that long and show no remorse. Story 23. The president of the company I used to work for changed when I first started, and the new president was a significant departure from the previous one who demonstrated strong morals and fought diligently with the board and other executives to maintain integrity. Eventually, she got into a disagreement with one of the executives, which upset the board, leading to her dismissal. The individual chosen to replace her was problematic. The new president immediately boasted about her ability to terminate entire departments and branches. She even referred to herself as the Wicked Witch. I was initially concerned about how she would affect me but tried to remain optimistic. However, my instincts were correct. She targeted me and we had significant clashes. I cannot tolerate someone who seems amused by ruining people's lives, as her reputation suggested. I spent a year attempting to make it work, but I grew to despise the sound of her laugh, which echoed throughout the building and constantly reminded me that she perceived herself as a winner, despite her troubling character. By that point, I was already planning to leave and had been exploring other opportunities. She called a department meeting, and I was as confrontational as possible without crossing a line. I was curt and disrespectful, maintaining an attitude of disdain throughout the meeting. She seemed completely unprepared for my behavior. I wish her nothing but the worst. My dislike for her surpasses anyone else I have ever encountered. She possessed an unsettling darkness that I cannot articulate. Story 24. Help represent a client as a criminal barrister who was around 70 years old and had sexually abused 3 generations of his own family. His sister, her daughter, and her granddaughter. Needless to say, I only lasted 9 months working in that field. He was truly a disgusting human being. Story 25. I used to work in a men's prison in the United Kingdom. I worked with thousands of prisoners, and I would only classify a handful of them as bad, as in born wired that way. One that sticks with me was a man who had committed some terrible acts to end up in prison. But once he was with us, he revealed a monstrous side. I sat with him a few times to help him write letters, and there was nothing that suggested compassion, warmth, or love. Felt like he was empty except for evil. He made friends with a little sparrow that flew into his cell. But one day, when he became angry that the officers weren't giving him enough attention, he just crushed it in his bare hands. He was eventually transferred to a more secure facility after he decided to dismantle a prison safety razor and then cut off both his nipples. That was an interesting day. Story 26. Can I declare a 3-way tie? I once had a school bully who was a complete monster. He beat me frequently and almost killed me on a school trip by trying to strangle me with a seatbelt. The school supported him because it was a terrible institution. He bragged about hurting animals and even threatened me with a knife, among other things. When I was pulled out of that school due to my mother getting fed up, he found out where I lived and regularly showed up at our home with a gang. He threatened us and our dog. The police didn't do much because he wasn't an adult yet, so my mother drove to his house and confronted his parents. He stopped after that. He is now severely brain damaged. He tried to deal drugs while pretending to act as a caregiver in the community, driving from house to house. Drug dealing in my country is mostly carried out by paramilitary groups, and they beat him and left him for dead. I say good. He made my school years hell. Enjoy eating through a tube and having to have caregivers wipe you for the rest of your life. Stephen, the dog you wanted to kill? He lived until about 12 and then suffered heart failure. We still talk about how wonderful he was. Nobody will care about you when you die, except for me, who will disrespect your grave. The other 2 were violent, abusive exes almost 10 years apart. I sure know how to pick them. Pure evil in both cases. Story 27. This is the perfect description of my best friend's grandmother. Perhaps because of dementia or a mental disorder, she gets angry every time my friend has something going well in her life. One day, my friend came with her boyfriend to a family dinner to share the news that they are moving in together. Her grandmother replied, "I'm sure it's not for long. You'll either split up or remain homeless together. It's hard to imagine a worse enemy." Story 28. I worked in a jail for almost a decade, and 2 people come to mind. The first person actively tried to spread HIV to anyone and everyone. He would constantly masturbate to make the female correctional officers uncomfortable. In segregation, he placed himself inappropriately on the meal trapdoor when passing him his meal. You never wanted to confront him because he would spit on you. He was a vile individual. The second person finally went to prison for the second time for prostituting her children. Although uneducated, she was very intelligent and highly manipulative. She convinced another inmate to attempt suicide to get to the hospital as a means of escape. I had to cut that girl down from hanging, and thankfully, she survived. She was a truly awful person. I often check records to see if these 2 are still alive. I look forward to the day they pass away because the world will be a better place for it. Story 29. Peter Nygaard. He was a fashion mogul with a long list of accusations going back to the 1970s. One thing I never understood was why people allowed him to get close to them. Maybe it's just me, but I knew within seconds of meeting him that he was bad news. Story 30. Years ago, I started a new job, and one of the first people to welcome me, along with the entire group of new hires, was an older woman who had been with the company for a while. She was very nice and welcoming, offering assistance and delivering a pep talk about how we younger new hires could positively impact the company and that change was necessary. She maintained this supportive approach for several months. Then she was promoted to supervisor. She became the meanest and most sarcastic person in the entire office. She no longer had time for anyone and completely changed her beliefs and how she treated people. Additionally, she was a poor administrator and generally disliked by her subordinates. On more than one occasion, she failed to complete her work, and when blame came from above, she promptly shifted the responsibility onto someone else. Somehow, she was promoted to an executive position within a year. Her ego grew tremendously, and she made it her mission to micromanage every interaction between employees and customers, as well as among employees. If two employees were in an office trying to resolve an issue, she would come down on us forcefully and demand an explanation for why it couldn't be handled over the phone or via email. She would also require us to do our jobs according to her preferences rather than following established protocols. A few years after her promotion, all 7 of us new hires had left the company. I stay in touch with one person who still works there, hired after me, and they are losing talent because nobody can tolerate this woman. She truly exemplified how one's position can go to their head. Story 31. The brother-in-law of one of my best friends was a raging alcoholic for a while. When he got sober, it became clear that he was just a horrible person, and I feel like he's actually worse now than he was when he was drinking. Everything he does serves his own interests and provokes reactions from people. He is a total contrarian, racist, and has committed serious offenses. I have a fairly large group of friends he used to be a part of, but no one will associate with him anymore because of his behavior. Story 32. My mother-in-law treats my wife like a servant and is rude to everyone in her life. She currently lives alone and is not in contact with her entire family except for my wife. Despite her heart failure and the need for dialysis, she cannot be civil to her only child, the only person left in her family who supports her. We believe she may have Asperger's syndrome and is likely dealing with borderline personality disorder. We are not certain because she has refused to seek help for her ongoing behavior problems. My wife cannot distance herself from her. Toxic or not, she is always there for her mother, but receives nothing in return except insults and guilt. I dislike her mother. Story 33. A high school student bullied a girl to the point that she left school, then acted confused when no one signed his yearbook. That was not just mean, it was profoundly cruel. Story 34. I had an online friend for a couple of years. We met during an open mic night, and from there we played various games together. He was a funny person, and I enjoyed his company. One day, everyone in our chat noticed that he hadn't said a word in over a week, and we became concerned. One of his real-life friends, who was also in the chat, went to check on him at his address. His girlfriend answered the door and said there was a family emergency and that he wasn't home. She was not telling the truth because one of the people in the group thought to check police records to see if he had been arrested. He had been, and the charge against him was for rape. His girlfriend bailed him out of jail, and he proceeded to send us all direct messages with a sob story about how he was innocent and would prove it. Nobody believed him, we blocked him and moved on. Story 35. In college, my wife babysat for Chris Hightower, who killed an entire family to cover up a financial scam. There is a Prime Video series called The World's Most Evil People, featuring a whole episode about him. Story 36. I met him at a show around 2000. He seemed really nice and got my friend's phone number. She was so excited. He flew her out to New York City and the Caribbean. It turns out he groomed her and exploited her. We were about 21 at the time. She will never press charges or talk about it because she is now married to a famous retired basketball player. The stories I heard later about what he did to her were shocking. That man is truly evil. Story 37. My sister's friend from our teenage years was Rachel, and I view her as a deeply flawed person. As a teenager, she showed little concern for who she harmed as long as it benefited her. She would lie, steal, and confront anyone who challenged her. Rachel often shoplifted with my sister. My sister was once caught, but Rachel escaped consequences, and my sister said nothing. Later, Rachel was caught, and she immediately implicated my sister. Rachel ended up dating and having a child with a friend of mine. She was a terrible partner and an even worse parent, and her child was often unruly. Fortunately, They broke up, and due to her poor parenting, the courts awarded my friend full custody, which is quite rare where I live. This happened around 20 years ago, and once Rachel was out of the picture, her child started to flourish. Since then, Rachel has been in and out of prison several times. She has had more children with different partners, many of whom are also problematic, but generally not as bad as she is, leading to her losing custody of her kids. At one point, she was forced to leave town after attempting to avoid another prison sentence by informing on every dealer she knew. The last update I heard about her was in 2017, when the local police posted on social media seeking her whereabouts for multiple warrants. I assume they caught up with her, as I haven't heard anything about her since then. Story 38. My mother is a difficult person. She has never killed anyone that I know of, but she exhibits narcissistic behavior. My sister and I, her only children, cannot stand her. She is a substance abuser. When we were kids, she chose a married man she was dating over my sister and me, which resulted in her losing custody of us. She manipulates her own aging mother, my grandmother, into feeling sorry for her because her children do not talk to her. Personally, my mother passed away when I was around 10 or 12, and the person she has become since then is unrecognizable. She may have had issues throughout her life, but around the age of 13 is when I truly realized how her behavior affected me and those I cared about. Story 39. My brother exhibits sociopathic behavior. He engages in social relationships solely to destroy them and to use how others have treated him to elicit pity, gain advantages, and criticize them for not doing enough. Typically, he ends up getting into confrontations and then repeats the cycle. I cut ties with him years ago, yet he frequently sends me messages through various social media accounts, claiming he is going to harm himself. I usually do not respond. He is currently dependent on his 19-year-old son, who is working hard to support them, while my brother remains at home, scrolling through social media and messaging any woman he can find in an attempt to seek pity. Our father has spent a considerable amount of money trying to help him. If all that money were combined, it could serve as a substantial down payment on a nice house. My brother's response is that he wishes our parents would pass away so he can inherit their home, even though he has been removed from their will. He is 44, unemployed, without a future or any aspirations. The most responsible job he held was a few years ago when he worked as a bagger at a grocery store, but he was fired for using methamphetamine while on duty. Story 40. I have never met the person, but I wish I had. An elderly friend of mine had a heart attack while going up the stairs to her apartment. She collapsed on the stairs. As she was lying there, a person stole her purse as she lay dying. She was not found until some time later. The purse was found in a dumpster in a nearby alley. Story 41. I knew a guy who attempted to date rape every girl in my friend circle in my early 20s. He embedded himself with my friends out of nowhere, tried to organize their events, and acted as a leader. He was overly nice and projected a progressive, sex-positive image, which raised red flags for me. Anytime I or anyone questioned his behavior, he would gaslight us, claiming we were intimidated. He constantly engaged in push-up contests or tried to outdo the other guys in the group, even though no one cared. He seemed obsessed with making others look bad to appear better in front of women who were clearly uninterested. Once, he reprimanded my friend for giving two girls, who lived nearby, a lift home, telling him, "Buddy, just don't touch them. They've had enough to drink," while trying to convince them to crash at his place an hour away. One day, he shared an amazing romantic encounter he had the night before, explaining why he was late to work. A few months later, this girl revealed that she had gone out one night, gotten blackout drunk, and woke up on his couch. She said, "The kitchen is there and you need the morning after pill," before leaving. It turned out she was the girl he had mentioned, and the timelines matched. After that, numerous stories emerged about him locking girls in rooms and not letting them leave, or trying to barge into rooms where girls were passed out, prompting people to block the doors. Before long, he was gone. I am pretty sure some people tried to involve the police as well. He knew exactly what he was doing and understood that he had to leave when he was found out. It makes me think he likely did this to his friend circle before us and probably to those after. Story 42. My mother's first husband. I didn't think for a second when I read that. He nearly beat my mother to death several times before I was even born, threw her down a flight of stairs, broke her neck, and then continued to beat her. I only met him a few times as a kid because of my older half-sister, but there is one instance that always sticks with me. I was sitting alone with him in his living room while my mother and sister were gathering some clothes, and he started telling me about the times when he drove trucks for the Red Cross in Bosnia and how they would have to run over babies because mothers would put babies in the street to stop them. He was smiling while telling me this, and I was maybe 12 years old. I'm sorry for the wall of text, but this brought out a core memory in me. Story 43. I met a serial killer once, but I didn't know it at the time. He signed in for lunch at a shelter where I worked for several days. A week later, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and local police showed up with his picture, but he hadn't been there since. Maybe a week or so later they caught him. I don't know if that counts, though, because I didn't know at the time. I've also met a lot of child molesters, also while working in mental health. I was aware of them. That's why they were there. It was never fun. By your criteria, though, in the original post, wishing evil on everyone and being aware of it, I'd have to say either the neo-Nazis I've encountered or G. Gordon Liddy, who did a book signing at a bookstore where I worked back in the early 1990s. The funny thing was, though I knew everything about Liddy, and he knew I knew, and knew I was far on the other side, he was incredibly friendly and even charming in a way that suggested he had no idea how fundamentally strange he was. I'm not saying I liked him, but if he avoided politics and you didn't know about him, you'd think he was just a friendly but stiff, really awkward person. You'd feel a little sorry for him. Years later, I was reminded of him when watching interviews with the soldiers who guarded Saddam Hussein before his execution. They were as friendly as could be, asking about their families, remembering their names, and what was going on in their lives, yet he would gas your village without blinking. Just to be extra clear, the reason I would rate neo-Nazis and Liddy worse than a group of ex-convicts comes down to one criterion: the sheer number of people they would hurt or kill if they had their way. If I had a button that could make any group disappear from the earth, I would make the child molesters vanish due to the ripple effect of the harm they do to children and the fact that there are so many of them. Most neo-Nazis just talk a lot but never actually do much. You asked about how much harm they would like to do, though, and it's tough to beat neo-Nazis in that contest. Story 44. When I was in high school, someone gained access to my Facebook account. They then convinced everyone that I had killed myself and that they were my sibling, just letting people know through my account. When I regained access to my account, many people thought I had done it as a stunt or prank. I lost a few friends and was removed from some groups. Eventually, I gave up trying to convince people it wasn't me and just deleted the account. Story 45. One of my dad's former business partners was a true psychopath. I went to a birthday party at a five-star hotel in Portugal about 20 years ago. My dad had gotten me a slingshot as a tourism gift. While we were waiting for our rooms, this business partner took the slingshot and started shooting pebbles at random people and things in the lobby. His oldest daughter struggled with substance abuse and later died of an overdose. He just had more children to replace her, as he had 3 ex-wives. Additionally, he tried to harm my dad when my dad wanted to sell his share of the business instead of giving it to the business partner for free. He succeeded in taking the business by bribing the judge. Years later, he had my dad thrown into jail for making him spend money and time on obtaining my family's part of the business. Story 46. When I was younger, I knew a guy everyone thought was an idiot. He believed he was tough, always carrying a knife. Not that he was a tough guy or anything, but he was so reckless that he was dangerous. We always said he would end up killing someone someday. A couple of years later, he and a few other guys killed a man in a fight, beating and stabbing him. He served 3 or 4 years and then got out on a technicality. 5 years later, he kidnapped someone, tortured him, and slit his throat. He is still in prison now. Story 47. 2 people, one recently and one over 30 years ago. I conduct home optician visits for individuals who are unable to leave their homes without assistance, such as those with dementia, amputees, the elderly, and those with developmental challenges. The older lady, in her 60s and weighing approximately 400 pounds, was unable to get out of bed and required full-time care. Despite the cold temperature, She was sweaty and unkempt. She was also a full-fledged supporter of far-right ideologies and took great delight in expressing racist and transphobic views throughout my visit. Confined to her bed, she spent her days on social media, having ventured down dark paths that the internet had to offer. She invested a lot of her time listening to well-known far-right internet personalities. On her bookshelves, she had everything from Mein Kampf to texts promoting conspiracy theories about Jewish global control. Here is the kicker: we weren't even in the United States. She had been bedbound and immersed in a right-wing echo chamber for so long that she forgot she wasn't in the country she glorified. This lady was so extreme that my partner, who isn't politically savvy and didn't understand why certain public figures are so disliked, experienced a reality check and had to completely reevaluate her beliefs once she realized that this lady was essentially regurgitating far-right talking points at a rapid pace. The last thing to note is the sheer joy she derived from her statements. Throughout the visit, she was grinning from ear to ear as she attempted to engage me in conversation, relishing how uncomfortable she made everyone in the room. This malicious enjoyment, which I believe stemmed from her awareness of the hateful nature of her words, is why I would consider her one of the most evil people I have ever encountered. The other person was Newt Gingrich, who was a family friend when I was a child. He would come over for meetings and barbecues with my stepdad. Even as a kid, I felt chills around him. Much like the lady mentioned, he would make bigoted comments out of nowhere and express a desire to harm certain groups of people. I was fairly young and do not recall specific details, other than the fact that it reached a point where I made a conscious decision to avoid being in the same room with him. Story 48. My brother comes to mind. He was a truly miserable person who hated everyone and never had anything good to say. Oddly enough, I got along with him. I just knew what to expect. Story 49. I worked as a correctional nurse for over 4.5 years in 2 different maximum security male facilities. The number of individuals I encountered who had no remorse for their crimes was staggering. One case, in particular, stands out. He assaulted another inmate, assaulted an officer, and then proceeded to murder his cellmate without any apparent reason. I suspected he simply wanted a transfer to a supermax facility or to receive the death penalty. However, in all my interactions with him after those acts, he never showed a single ounce of remorse. Story 50. The woman, Bethany, who destroyed my relationship with my grandmother, told me my grandma said, "When your mother attempted suicide, I wish she'd succeeded. I always knew my family was the black sheep side, but that one hurt terribly. I told my brother and we confronted my grandparents. They called us liars and said they wanted nothing to do with us. Then, Bethany turned her back to them and grinned at us, the maniacal grin of a sadistic person. She played us. My brother piped up, 'Yes, there is a liar in the house. But when we leave, she will still be here.' We left and never saw my grandparents again. They believed her side. We attended the same church, and our minister attempted to intervene. When he confronted her, she told the church authorities he sexually assaulted her and got him fired. We finally quit going to that church. From what we understand, Bethany did this with quite a few people. One minister, 3 pastors later, reached out to us and wanted to know why we left the church since attendance was declining. We shared the story. He said he had been in counseling with her and, while he couldn't share their sessions or the results, let me know that it wasn't us. It was her. We later found out she spent time in an institution for a psychological disorder. My grandparents preceded her in death, so they never learned the truth. They also left the entirety of their estate to the other half of the family. Story 51. I met her, but we are not acquainted, although I know a lot about her through friends. For context, she is roughly 30 years old. She emotionally cheated on her long-term boyfriend with a 17-year-old from overseas whom she met in an online game. They engaged in texting, exchanged explicit photos, and declared love for each other. She flew to meet this 17-year-old, and it was later revealed that she had sexual relations with him, which surprised no one. She secretly did not pay their rent for 6 months and kept the money until her boyfriend confronted her about it. When he found out, feeling jaded and depressed, he requested that she not communicate with this young man for just 1 day. She ignored his request, and this was on her boyfriend's birthday. She purchased another ticket to see the 17-year-old, prompting her boyfriend to give her an ultimatum, not to return if she traveled. He ended the relationship after their conversation, during which she promised not to see the young man. Nevertheless, she took the flight despite their discussion. Her actions are utterly reprehensible, bordering on grooming, characterized by repeated infidelity, emotional abuse, manipulation, and theft. She is truly an extremely unpleasant person. Story 52. When I worked on the cruiser, I had a coworker who always had to be the dominant male, kind of like a grown-up high school bully. I know that idea is outdated, but it doesn't matter. He was just as outdated. He would always try to mess with people. For example, if I talked during our coffee break about my then-girlfriend, he would ask if she swallowed. He also bragged about all the women he had been with, which just sounded like a teenage boy. I got back at him. We were going to share a cabin, and he told me I better watch out because my backside might hurt in the morning, suggesting he might feel attracted to me. I stared him seriously in the eyes and said, "Thank God. It has been ages since I had a real man treating me the only way a man can treat me. If you pull my hair while we're intimate, do you want me to call you daddy?" That deflated him. He reacted with disgust. I pouted and said, "I thought you loved me, daddy." After I quit that job, he tried to add me as a friend on social media. I just blocked him. I didn't want anything to do with that person and didn't want to see him again. Story 53. Laura Michelle Owens, Scottsdale, Arizona. She is despicable. Visit the Justice for Clayton subreddit for further information. Trust me, you won't be able to look away. Story 54. Donna M. in Florida is an unpleasant individual. She is litigious and exploits those around her. I believe she worked as a madame for girls in her bar. I won't use her full name due to her litigious behavior. Story 55. My ex. He sad me. Then when I broke up with him, he started to follow me and park his car near my house so I would see it and get scared. Then he started messaging my family with threats, trying to convince them to force me to get back with him. When he understood I was doing my best to never meet him again, I had my mom pick me up from university and would only go out if somebody was with me. He started spreading horrible lies about my family and me. It's been 8 years, and I hate him to this day. Story 56. I had a friend who murdered her mother with a machete during the early stages of COVID-19. Her mother had been allowing her to live with her to provide support. She lost custody of her children and then moved with her mother to the mainland. She had a serious drug problem. Her family knew something was very wrong mentally and placed her in a psychiatric hospital. Once she was released, she became much angrier and would threaten her mother, brother, and aunt and uncle. Her mother felt trapped and unable to make her leave. Her mother was sweet, accepting, and non-judgmental. She just wanted to help her daughter, who ultimately murdered her to the point of being almost unrecognizable when the paramedics arrived. Fortunately, both of her children have good fathers who helped them cope with what happened to their grandmother, and they are doing well. Story 57. My friend's ex who pretended to have cancer to prevent her from breaking up with him. If there is a VIP lounge in hell, he is already on the guest list. Story 58. My ex-boyfriend fits this description. I am not saying this as a bitter ex, but he was truly awful to everyone in his life. It's as if he couldn't view others as human and always felt a need to control everyone and everything. He would create troubling situations to see what reactions he would get and then use them as an excuse to be violent. He is a very lonely and self-conscious person inside. It was impossible to feel normal with him. He got deep into my head to the point where I thought I would have to end my life to be rid of his control over my life. He basically held me hostage in a hotel and physically assaulted me, then tried to convince me that it never happened and that I imagined the entire thing. It was surprising because I had never been easily manipulated before. I was in my 20s and he is 15 years older than me. When I would upset him over nothing, he would cut me off for days or weeks. No contact, but he would drive by my house to ensure I wasn't with anyone else. I feel sick thinking about it. I know others have had similar experiences because they have reached out to me. I look forward to seeing his obituary one day. Story 59. The safety director for a client that my company has a contract with demonstrates concerning behavior. He could easily be mistaken for John Wayne Gacy, as he often talks down to everyone and asks ridiculous, rhetorical questions to stir up trouble. He feels immune to any form of reprisal from the company. He derives pleasure from firing people. The more dramatic the spectacle, the better. He seems to relish creating chaos in others' lives, even fabricating stories to justify calling the police to remove employees. A particularly illustrative incident occurred on the factory floor when he observed an employee using a miter saw in an unsafe manner, violating company policy. Instead of addressing the issue immediately to prevent injury, he chose to do nothing and informed the person's supervisor later. His focus appeared to be more on getting someone in trouble than on the safety of the employee. This director is chillingly cold, cruel, and malicious. A brief conversation with him reveals his true nature. As is common with individuals like him, he has secured a position of significant power and wealth, allowing him to operate without fear of losing his status. Moreover, he has placed multiple relatives in influential positions within the company, regardless of their lack of experience. His nephew is now a plant manager earning several $100,000 a year at the age of 29. His brother-in-law was the former head of security, and his cousin is involved in purchasing. These are just the relatives I am aware of. Story 60. Sante Kimes, the epitome of evil wrapped in a kind grandmotherly facade, and her son murdered several people. Story 61. My ex. The more I look back on that time, the more I realize he had bad intentions from the start. He was only ever looking to use me. He stole, lied, and cheated. He destroyed my self-esteem and my confidence, making me doubt my own sanity and memories. He insisted on children only to use them as pawns against me and then abandon them after we finally split. His only acknowledgement of their existence is when he's lying to child maintenance services. He works cash in hand and claims benefits to keep his payments to child maintenance services as low as possible. He bounces from woman to woman, promising the world and destroying their lives. I am currently organizing everything for my fiancée to adopt the children. I can't wait for them to have the dad they deserve and to cut ties with him forever. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.